Naomi Carter had never craved medals, headlines, or parades. What she wanted, what she had always wanted, was clarity. The kind of clarity that came from watching a storm roll in from the sea and knowing exactly when to move. The kind of clarity that could cut through noise, bias, and assumption. But on that particular August morning, even clarity had its limits. The sky over Washington, D.C. was the color of dull pewter when Naomi stood by her office window in full uniform, a steaming mug of black tea cupped in her hand. Three silver stars shimmered on each shoulder of her jacket, quietly signifying nearly 3 decades of military service. Intelligence briefings, counterinsurgency strategy, satellite audits. Her days at the Pentagon were rarely quiet, but today was different. On the polished desk behind her lay a red folder labeled Emergency Leave, Approved. Inside it, the orders granting her temporary release from command sat beside a hand-signed letter from General Harrington. Her mother's condition had worsened overnight. Congestive heart failure. Her attending nurse, a woman with the voice of someone used to giving bad news gently, had called just past midnight. She's stable, but not for long. Naomi hadn't hesitated. She handed off her briefings, encrypted her work terminal, and packed one small leather bag. She wasn't flying commercial. She wasn't taking the military jet either. What she needed was time and silence, Ron. The long drive to Georgia in her private black Mercedes would grant her both. By 6:15 a.m. she was on the road. Naomi's journey took her south, away from marble corridors and institutional sterility, through Virginia's wooded highways and into the heart of the South she had left behind. Her GPS showed 13 hours and 22 minutes to Savannah. But Naomi didn't need the device to guide her. Every curve of the road past Richmond, every rusting signpost along Route 29 was already etched in her memory. This wasn't just a road trip, it was a return to origin. And like most origin stories, hers was stitched with contradictions. She had been born in 1969 in the tight-knit East Side neighborhood of Savannah, back when redlining maps were still active behind closed doors, and black families were told, gently and firmly, where they didn't belong. Her father, Marcus Carter Sr., had served in Vietnam with distinction and returned home to a country that still saw his skin before his uniform. Naomi was 8 the night she watched police officers yank her father from their family sedan during a routine traffic stop. They claimed he fit the description, ignored his military ID, handcuffed him on the sidewalk while Naomi sat frozen in the back seat, wide-eyed and silent. Her mother, Elaine Carter, a school teacher whose strength came not from volume, but from immovable resolve, showed up at the station with 2 civil rights attorneys and a pastor. 6 hours later, her father walked out, but something had shifted. That night, Naomi had crept from her bedroom and overheard her father whispering, voice cracked open, to Elaine, "They can take a man's keys, his car, his name, but they can't take what's in his mind or his dignity unless he lets them." That was the moment Naomi began training for a war she couldn't name yet, not with rifles, but with excellence, precision, resolve. Years later, she became one of the first black women in her West Point class, one of only 14 out of over 1,000 cadets. She didn't complain when instructors questioned her presence. She outscored most of them, graduated in the top 5% of her class. Then came the deployments, Desert Storm, Kandahar, Ramadi. She had led teams through sandstorms, decoded insurgent patterns no analyst saw, and once driven 11 miles under enemy fire to deliver intelligence that saved 200 lives. Her reward, a Bronze Star, several commendations, and whispers from fellow officers who still assumed she was someone's assistant, but she never stopped. By 2022, Naomi was a lieutenant general with a specialty in classified intelligence strategy and cyber operations. She had briefed cabinet members, read files the public would never know existed. And yet, As she crossed into Georgia that morning, past the welcome sign half hidden by kudzu, a sense of caution curled quietly in her chest. Not fear, not exactly, but memory. Because uniform or not, stars or not, she was still a black woman behind the wheel of an expensive car in rural Georgia. And in places like Pinewood County, some legacies didn't fade with rank. The moment Naomi saw the cruiser slip into her rearview mirror, she knew. It didn't accelerate, didn't flash lights, just lingered, like a shadow that had learned to pace. She was somewhere between Pinewood Junction and an old pecan grove she remembered from childhood. Nothing but fudge silence and asphalt in every direction. No traffic, no pedestrians, just her, the black Mercedes S-Class, and the creeping certainty that something familiar, but no less dangerous, was about to unfold. She checked the speedometer. 45. Exactly the posted limit. Her lane position? Dead center. Mirrors aligned. Nothing erratic, nothing suspicious. Still the cruiser followed. When the blue lights finally came on, Naomi's hands were already in motion. Turn signal, slow deceleration, pull off to the gravel shoulder with enough angle to keep herself visible to traffic. Engine off, both hands at 10 and 2. The window cracked just halfway. License, registration, military ID, placed neatly on the dashboard in plain sight. And this choreography wasn't born of paranoia. It was protocol. She had written portions of it herself in military training manuals. How to survive civilian law enforcement encounters while off duty, particularly for black service members. But writing protocol and living inside it were two very different things. A minute passed, then footsteps. Gravel crunched with measured heaviness, each step louder than it needed to be. The officer was white, mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, aviator sunglasses masked her eyes. Her right hand hovered near her sidearm, fingers flexing. "License and registration," she barked, without greeting. Naomi nodded slowly. "Good afternoon, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop? I believe I was within all posted." "You were weaving across the center line," the officer snapped, cutting her off. "Now I won't ask again." A fabricated charge. Naomi's military training included pattern driving and evasive maneuvers in foreign terrain. She hadn't touched the center line, but this was no time for argument. Her voice remained level. "My documents are on the dashboard. I will use my right hand to retrieve and hand them to you." The officer didn't acknowledge the comment. She took the ID without a word and stepped back. From the side mirror, Naomi watched her retreat to the cruiser. Watched her flip open the ID. Saw the moment her brow furrowed at the words. Lieutenant General Naomi Carter, Pentagon Intelligence Command. Even through tinted glass, Naomi saw the disbelief forming, the shift in posture, a pause, then radio chatter. The officer was saying something quickly into her shoulder mic, but Naomi couldn't hear the words. Only saw the intensity building. 5 minutes passed, then the officer returned. "Step out of the vehicle." Naomi blinked. "Officer Bennett." She had caught the name tag. "I'm respectfully asking for clarification. I've complied with all requests. There's no probable cause to—" I said out of the vehicle. She reached for her holster. Naomi's heart rate ticked up, not from fear, but from calculation. Every variable raced through her mind. The gravel surface, lack of witnesses, body cam status unknown. The Pentagon protocol was clear. Comply now, contest later, survive first. "I am not impaired. I have consumed no alcohol or substances," Naomi said clearly, "but I will comply." She opened the door slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. As she stepped out, the heat slammed into her. 98 degrees, humid, no wind. The officer wasted no time. "Face the vehicle, hands behind your back." "Officer Bennett, I'd like to formally state for the record that I am a flag officer in the United States military and have shown no signs of... Now! The handcuffs clicked shut with a violent finality. Tight, too tight. The thin skin of Naomi's wrists instantly stung beneath the metal. She didn't resist, didn't flinch, only lifted her chin a half-inch higher. "This is a DUI investigation," Bennett announced loudly, "for no one in particular. I detected the odor of alcohol." Naomi's jaw locked. There had been no odor, nothing erratic, no cause. But the story was being written anyway, loudly, publicly, on a desolate Georgia road. As she was escorted to the back seat of the patrol, a passing pickup slowed. The passenger raised a phone, filming. A sliver of relief flickered inside Naomi. Documentation, witnesses, truth, even in pixels, could still be power. Inside the sweltering squad car, Naomi whispered a silent line she remembered from her father, spoken after his wrongful detention. "They can take your freedom for a moment, but never your discipline. Never mind." And now it was her turn to prove it. The interior of the patrol car felt like a punishment engineered by nature itself, an oven on wheels beneath the August Georgia sun. Naomi Carter sat upright, her wrists still bound behind her back, the stiff plastic seat pressing into her shoulders. The air conditioning vents in Officer Rachel Bennett's cruiser, predictably, were aimed entirely forward. Nothing reached the back. From the partition, Naomi could only catch fragments of Bennett's voice. She was radioing something. The tone was clipped, laced with authority, and now growing bolder. Likely Bennett believed she had caught someone important faking military credentials. That delusion gave her fuel. Naomi's wrists throbbed. She adjusted her breathing, slow, deliberate, not from panic, but from discipline. Every second of this matters, she reminded herself. She had endured worse, high-pressure interrogations, heat exhaustion in hostile terrain, in field surgeries without an anesthetic. But this was different. This was personal. And it wasn't just her name on the line. It was every service member who had ever been pulled over while off duty, disrespected despite the uniform they wore in silence. Another car approached. The second patrol car parked behind them with a crunch of gravel. A male officer stepped out, tall, late 30s, dark buzz cut. His nameplate read J. Collins. From the side mirror, Naomi caught his expression as he surveyed the scene. A black woman in professional attire, bound in handcuffs, sitting in the back of a police cruiser. He frowned. Collins approached Bennett, who had her arms folded, one hip cocked against her cruiser. Their conversation was low but animated. Collins gestured toward the Mercedes, then toward Naomi. His tone, from what Naomi could make out, was calmer, more measured. Bennett, by contrast, grew sharper, more defensive. Naomi watched closely. Body language told a story that words couldn't. A minute later, Collins opened the back door. "Ma'am," he began, voice firm but not hostile. "Officer Bennett states you were swerving and that she suspected impairment. Is there any medical condition I should know about?" "No, Officer Collins," Naomi said evenly. "I have not consumed alcohol or any impairing substance. I'm traveling from Washington, D.C. to Savannah to see my mother, who is critically ill. I am a lieutenant general in the United States Army. My identification is valid and current." Collins blinked, then turned his head slightly, as if trying to reconcile the image before him with what he'd just heard. "Your active duty?" "Yes, my Pentagon credentials are in my briefcase," which Officer Bennett removed from the vehicle. He stepped away again. This time, Naomi didn't look away. Through the window, she watched him speak to Bennett with what now appeared to be restrained urgency. Bennett shook her head, her arms flailing with exaggerated confidence. She mimed quotation marks with her fingers as she referred to Naomi as a general. The mockery stung, but only momentarily. Naomi had spent decades in rooms where her authority was doubted, only to later silence those who had questioned her. Collins returned. His jaw was tight now. His voice was even lower. "Ma'am, I'd like to confirm your identity with my department. Can I access your Pentagon card?" "You may," Naomi replied, "but I am invoking Protocol 7. You are required to notify my command immediately. That includes the Office of Military Affairs in the Pentagon Emergency Contact Line." The air changed. Collins blinked. Protocol 7 was no casual invocation. It was a classified level alert designed for high-ranking officers detained or compromised while in civilian jurisdictions. It required immediate escalation, legal consultation, and direct contact with military command. Collins knew it. "I understand," he said, stepping back. 10 minutes later, the atmosphere shifted entirely. A secure call came into the police station. Sergeant Wallace, the senior officer on duty, was told firmly that the Pentagon was now involved. Colonel Elena Martinez, senior judge advocate, general officer stationed at Fort Benning, was en route by helicopter. The Secretary of the Army had been briefed. The White House informed. Bennett had no idea what she triggered. Inside the cruiser, Naomi exhaled slowly. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was confirmation that the system she had served so loyally was, for once, serving her back. That somewhere above the pine trees and small-town politics, truth still had weight. As the radio buzzed with new commands and officers scrambled into unfamiliar protocol, Naomi sat still, her posture as unshakable as the stars on her shoulders. Rachel Bennett sat stiffly in Sergeant Wallace's office, hands clenched on her lap, jaw tight. The walls felt smaller than usual, less like a workplace, more like a courtroom. Her badge and sidearms sat locked in a desk drawer, relinquished without ceremony. She still didn't fully grasp how quickly everything had spiraled. Just 2 hours earlier, she'd been in control. A routine traffic stop, a weaving vehicle with DC plates, and what she believed was a suspect trying to intimidate her with a fake military ID. It wasn't the first time she'd seen out-of-state drivers flaunting status. She was used to calling the shots, to decide who belonged and who didn't. Now, with the Pentagon's legal division involved, her decisions were no longer hers to defend. Outside the room, the Pinewood County station buzzed like a hive struck by lightning. Officers whispered. Phones rang nonstop. The Secretary of the Army had called. A military helicopter had touched down at the municipal airfield. A federal legal team was en route. And in the back office, Lieutenant General Naomi Carter, freed from her cuffs, sat calmly in a private conference room, speaking via encrypted phone to Pentagon brass. She had declined the offer of an immediate escort, declined even a medical check for her bruised wrists. Instead, she asked for protocol documentation, internal policy review data, and the department's stop and search statistics for the past 5 years. The message was clear. This was bigger than her. By late afternoon, Pinewood County Police Department was under siege. By the law, by the media, and by its conscience. Sergeant Wallace and Chief Hayes reviewed Officer Bennett's personnel file under a lens they had never dared use before. It wasn't pretty. Unfiled complaints, repeated traffic stops of Black and Latino drivers, discrepancies in search justification, informal warnings, all documented but never escalated. Her pattern was clear. Only now there was no plausible deniability. The person she had wrongly arrested was not just a military officer, but one of the nation's top intelligence leaders. The system had protected Rachel Bennett for years, but it wouldn't protect her from this. And worse, it had been caught on camera. The dashcam footage showed Naomi complying calmly. No weaving, no raised voice, no resistance. The cuffs, the dismissive tone, the smirk. Everything Bennett thought was happening quietly on a dusty roadside was now under fluorescent review. By the time Colonel Elena Martinez stepped into the building, the air inside had changed. Her uniform was crisp, her movements measured, her voice quiet but steel-tipped. I need full access to body cam footage, dispatch logs, radio recordings, and Officer Bennett's personnel record, she told the chief. This will not be an informal review. Martinez walked into Naomi's room and saluted with quiet gravity. The two women spoke briefly, strategically. Naomi made her intentions clear. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about precedent, about ensuring that the next time a Black woman is pulled over in silence, the outcome doesn't depend on whether she has stars on her collar. Colonel Martinez nodded. Understood, General. We'll pursue both accountability and structural review. At 5:47 p.m., Rachel Bennett was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Her access to the station's systems was revoked. Her union representation was notified, though even they understood this would not be an easy defense. Meanwhile, outside the station, media vans were assembling. The roadside video had gone viral, over 1.7 million views within hours. Hashtags trended. Public officials released cautious statements. Civil rights attorneys across the state were preparing requests for department-wide stop data. Pinewood County, long hidden under the radar, had become a case study. And Naomi Carter? She sat quietly in the break room, now empty except for a cold bottle of water and her worn leather briefcase. On her screen glowed the beginnings of a report, not about her humiliation, but about the systems that allowed it. That night, as the sun dipped beneath the fields outside, Chief Hayes entered the room where she waited. General Carter, he began, voice tight, I want to extend my deepest apologies on behalf of the department. Naomi met his eyes. Chief, what I need is not an apology. What I need is change. And with that, the reckoning began, not just for Officer Bennett, but for every unchecked moment of quiet injustice that had passed through that building's doors. The ribbon was blue silk and fluttered slightly in the autumn wind as Elaine Carter's trembling hands reached out to cut it. Flanking her on either side stood her daughter, General Naomi Carter, and Chief Walter Hayes, now somber, reflective, and no longer hiding behind platitudes. Cameras clicked. Local news crews rolled. But the moment was not about performance. It was about transformation. The Elaine Carter Community Justice Center, built on the ashes of Pinewood County's old police station, symbolized not just infrastructure but reckoning. Glass-walled, open-planned, and intentionally designed to reflect transparency, the center housed the Reformed Police Department, a civilian oversight board, mental health crisis teams, and youth de-escalation programs. Every officer hired since the incident had been trained under a new model, guardian before enforcer, listening before assuming. And it all started because Naomi had chosen strategy over rage. Inside, the crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony were more than just officials. Seated in the front row were members of the community who had once feared this very department. The local pastor whose son was stopped for looking nervous. The Latina mother whose car was searched while her children cried in the back seat. And the teenage boy who recorded Naomi's roadside arrest, now hailed as a catalyst for truth. General Carter, in full uniform and 4 silver stars gleaming on her shoulders, having since been promoted to full general and appointed to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stepped to the podium. This center bears my mother's name, she began, voice steady, clear and low, but it carries the stories of many. This isn't about one officer and one mistake. It's about patterns that persist until they are exposed and dismantled. She paused, scanning the crowd, resting briefly on the new cadet seated near the back. Young, diverse, alert. I was detained because of how I looked, not because of how I acted. The difference between my story and so many others, she said slowly, is not behavior, it's rank. It's a platform, it's the privilege of visibility, and that should disturb every single one of us. Murmurs of agreement, some bowed heads, others wiped quiet tears. But what we do next is what defines us, she continued. I do not seek to destroy departments. I seek to transform them. Not every officer is malicious, but every officer is responsible. Every leader is accountable. And every community deserves to be served, not surveilled. Applause, not thunderous but deep, like something being planted in the soil. Near the back, quietly watching, stood Rachel Bennett, thinner, older, dressed in plain gray. Recently released after serving 15 months in a minimum security facility, she had arrived with no fanfare, no special invitation, just a quiet desire to witness what her choices had helped catalyze. Beside her stood Colonel Elena Martinez, who had visited her 3 times during incarceration, not to scold, but to listen. Rachel, to her surprise, had volunteered to contribute to a new training module, CO, Bias Before Badge, using footage of her stop to illustrate how systemic prejudice hides in plain view. It had become mandatory across 14 countries, and now, at the back of the ceremony, she lowered her head, not in shame but in quiet, complicated acknowledgement. As the crowd dispersed and tours of the new center began, Naomi exited through a side hall. She found herself alone for a moment under a sprawling oak tree beside the building until footsteps approached. General Carter? Rachel's voice was quiet, unsteady. Naomi turned. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want you to know the work I'm doing, it matters to me now. I see it. I see everything I couldn't see before. Naomi studied her, studied her. The sun filtered through the trees above, dappled across Rachel's face, and for the first time, her eyes held no defense. Just weight. And something else. Clarity. You don't need my forgiveness, Naomi said gently. You need to keep doing the work. That's how change holds. Rachel nodded, emotion tightening at her features. Then she stepped back. No handshakes, no ceremony, just a quiet understanding. That evening, Naomi drove alone to her father's grave. She stood beside it in the full-dress uniform, the stars glinting against the dusk. They tried again, Daddy, she whispered. But this time, it didn't end with silence. She stood there for a while, the wind brushing softly against her coat, before finally turning toward the horizon, where the road waited, open, possible. This story reminds us that justice is not automatic. Even for those who've earned medals, led missions, or wear stars on their shoulders. Bias does not pause for rank, and dignity can still be assaulted under the guise of authority, but it also shows us the power of measured resistance. Naomi Carter's strength lay not in retaliation, but in her discipline, strategy, and clarity of purpose. She didn't simply demand justice for herself. She restructured an entire system to serve others. True accountability is not about punishing one person. It's about building structures where such violations cannot survive. It is a commitment to transformation over vengeance, truth over optics, and systems over symbols. And perhaps most importantly, justice should never depend on who you are. It should protect you because you are.